It was supposed to be spring, but the air still carried the cold breath of winter. The kind of cold that doesn't just live in the wind, it stays inside you. I used to believe that when the snow melted, things would get easier. But sometimes, the thaw only reveals what's been buried underneath. Frank still hadn't called. By March, I stopped checking the phone every hour. You don't notice when hope fades. It just gets quieter each day. Until one morning, you realize it's gone. I poured my coffee, looked out the kitchen window and saw the same grey sky I'd seen for months. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for it to change. Lisa was barely speaking to me. She'd come home from school, throw her bag down and lock herself in her room. I could hear her music through the door, loud enough to drown out her thoughts, but not loud enough to hide her sadness. I wanted to knock, to tell her I understood, that being angry was just another way of missing someone. But instead, I let her be. I was afraid that if I opened that door, everything we'd both been holding inside would come spilling out. Tommy, on the other hand, had started talking more, mostly to the cat. He'd sit on the living room floor, whispering secrets into its fur, like it could carry them somewhere safe. Children have a way of trusting silence. They don't fear it the way adults do. Maybe that's why I started listening again. Not just to the sounds of the house, but to the spaces between them. One evening, I found an old letter under a stack of books in the kitchen drawer. It was from the year we first moved into the house. Frank's handwriting, still strong and steady. He'd written, "No matter how hard it gets, Maggie, promise me we won't give up on the home we're building." I read that line over and over, my eyes tracing every curve of his letters until they blurred into one. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. That night, I took the letter outside. The air was still cold, but the stars were bright. The kind of brightness that hurts to look at. I stood by the porch, holding the paper tight in my hands, and whispered to the wind, "I didn't give up, Frank. You did." The words didn't echo. They just drifted away like smoke. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to chase them. The next morning, Lisa sat at the table quietly eating her cereal. She looked tired, older somehow. Then she said, "Mum, can we drive somewhere today?" "Just anywhere." It was the first thing she'd said to me in days. So we did. We drove until the town disappeared behind us, past the frozen lake, past the empty gas station, past everything that felt too familiar. The road stretched on for miles, quiet and endless. At one point, Lisa rolled down the window and the cold air rushed in. She smiled just a little, and that was enough. For the first time, I realized spring might not come when the calendar says it should. Sometimes it arrives in moments. A smile, a drive, a small decision to keep going. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not a new beginning, but a slow, quiet return to yourself. That night when we got home, I lit a candle and sat by the window. The snow had finally started to melt. It wasn't much, just small streams running down the glass. But it was enough to remind me. Even the coldest seasons end eventually. It was the first morning of summer. I didn't wake up to the sound of birds, but to the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house was quiet, but that silence no longer hurt. What once felt unbearable had somehow become peaceful. Frank's absence still lived in certain corners of the house. No one sat in his armchair in the living room. I couldn't bring myself to put away one of his coffee mugs. But I didn't cry anymore. Time doesn't make you forget. It just teaches you how to carry things differently. Lisa had gone off to college. At first, when her room stayed empty, I felt lost. One morning, while making her bed, I found a small note under her pillow. "Thank you for everything, Mom. I was quiet sometimes, but I always heard you." That day, I realized how even a small piece of paper could change the direction of your heart. Tommy was still home. He never stopped drawing. He painted on walls, on boxes, even on the backs of envelopes. One day he showed me a painting, a family portrait made of colors. But this time, the fourth person had returned. Not as a man, but as light. "Dad isn't here anymore, Mom," he said. "But look, in the picture, he's with us, like light." My eyes filled with tears. Because sometimes, children understand truth more clearly than adults do. As summer went on, I changed too. I started volunteering more at the library. When I read stories to the children, I no longer tried to hide the tremor in my voice. That trembling wasn't a sign of loss. It was a trace of life. One little girl came up to me and said, "Your voice makes me feel safe." Such a simple, honest sentence. And suddenly, all the weight of the years lifted from my shoulders. In the evenings, I made a habit of sitting on the porch to watch the sunset. My cat would nap by my feet, as always. Sometimes the wind would scatter the leaves and I would just watch. I used to think everything needed to have meaning. Now I know. Some things just happen. And within those things, we reshape ourselves. One day, I found a letter from Frank in the mailbox. It was dated months ago. Just a short note. "I hope you've been able to forgive me." I still haven't forgiven myself. I held the letter for a long time. Then I stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the sky. And I realized something. Some apologies aren't meant to be heard, only released. So I let it go. And I felt something lift inside me. That night, for the first time in a long while, I did something I hadn't done. I turned on the radio. An old jazz tune was playing. I drew the curtains aside. The stars were shining outside. And I smiled to myself. Being broken no longer defined me. What defined me now was that I could still love. Now, every morning, I drink my coffee and watch the world outside my window. People passing by, mail trucks rumbling down the road, children laughing in the distance. Everything feels ordinary, and yet somehow miraculous. Sometimes Lisa calls. Sometimes Tommy shows me his new drawings. Life isn't as full as it once was, but there's a quiet balance in the silence now. And I find myself thinking, some roads are meant to be walked alone, but they always lead you back to your own heart. It started with a letter, not the one from Frank. This one came months later. No return address, just my name, written in soft, familiar handwriting. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper and a pressed wildflower. The words were few. For the days you forgot how beautiful you were. No signature, no clue, but the scent of that paper. It reminded me of a place I hadn't thought about in years. My mother's garden. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The morning light slipping through the blinds, painting soft lines across the floor. Tommy was asleep, and the house was wrapped in that gentle kind of silence that only early hours carry. As I turned the letter over in my hands, something inside me cracked open. Not from sadness this time, but from remembering. I realized I'd spent so many years surviving. I'd forgotten how to simply exist. Later that day, I drove out of town. The air smelled of rain and pine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have a destination. Just a feeling that I needed to go somewhere that remembered me. The road curved through old neighborhoods, past broken fences and mailboxes leaning toward time. At the edge of the woods, I saw it. The house I grew up in. It was smaller than I remembered. The porch paint peeled, the swing missing one chain. But when the wind blew, the same sound echoed. That low wooden creak that once lulled me to sleep as a child. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just stood by the gate and whispered, "I made it, Mom." It wasn't forgiveness I felt. It wasn't closure either. It was something in between. A quiet acceptance that not every story ends where we expect it to. Some just fade into peace. As the sun began to set, I pulled an old notebook from the passenger seat. It was the one Frank had given me years ago, with the words, "Write it down before it disappears." For the first time, I opened it. And I began to write. Not about pain, not about loss, but about stillness. The stillness that follows every storm. The quiet that isn't empty anymore. When I finished, I looked up. The road ahead was long, but it didn't feel lonely. Somewhere between the letters, the echoes, and the silence, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again.